welcome back to another episode of Pizza and Property. My name is Todd Sloan. This is your weekly slice edition. And today it's time to talk towns. It's time to talk where is the market actually still growing and still kicking goals growth-wise. With all the negativity in the media at the moment, you'd be forgiven to think that the whole market as Australia is struggling at the moment. But that's not really the case, as you and I know as property investors. But where is going well? To find out, as always, we turn to our resident data expert, Mr. Arjun Paliwal from InvestorKit, so we can talk about this month's hotspot, what's driving it, where it is, as well as all the rest of the data that you need to better understand the area. Let's jump into this episode right now with Arjun Paliwal. Arjun, it's time to find the spots that are heating up. How you going?
I'm good, mate. And in this case, it's a spot that continues to heat up and doesn't seem to want to slow down.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so we're talking about somewhere that's already done reasonably well then by the sounds of things and positioned to do even better long term. What do we got under the microscope today? Actually, no, we're not calling it a microscope. What town are we looking at today?
Well, it's not in need of a microscope. It is a major city connected to another major city, and it's the town of Toowoomba. And actually, interestingly enough, Todd, we spoke about it earlier on as a hotspot, and boy, has it produced. It's continued to, do well. And amongst rising headwinds, like the second lowest sentiment since we've, really collected that data outside of GFC, also from 7 consecutive interest rate rises, and also many global conditions worsening, the city continues to move from strength to strength, albeit not at the same pace as last year's supersized growth.
Yeah, I mean, we can't compare ourselves to the craziness that was 2021, though. But
I almost feel like we need to mention it all the time, though, just because everyone's got this yeah. Where are we buying next? I need that 20%er again.
Well, mate, look, we looked at this town about, what was it? I think it was about 6 months ago now. We looked at Toowoomba. So what's changed in the past 6 months as far as median price, rental yield, and what's actually happening there?
Well, firstly, what hasn't changed is the growth. It's still growing, albeit at a slower pace.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of median prices, we finally crossed that 500K mark with just over 20% growth in the last 12 months. As for vacancy rates, it's also super low. I mean, vacancy rates are still at 0.3%, and people are getting applications left, right, and center for rental properties.
She said 0.3%.
0.3%, that's right.
I actually went to Toowoomba for the first time about 5 weeks ago. Is it on top of a mountain? I just felt like I was driving up forever.
It feels like that. Pretty much as the ranges, right? So that's kind of the core part here. And with Toowoomba, there has to be a shout out. I think it's called Picnic Point.
Yeah.
And this is like near Rangeville side and Unreal Cafe up top. By Unreal, I mentioned the views. Coffee was okay. Sorry, guys. But the views was epic. And I don't know, I've mentioned this to my wife, so I feel kind of like corny now saying this to the public, but I am going to say it. Like martial arts movies where someone's on the top of a massive mountain, they've got the headband on, and they're like, those punches that they do forward, like one arm down by your waist, back then the other one, and you're just looking and the cameras going all around you. It's got those vibes. Like when you're on the hill, you're looking out at the ranges, you just want to do some cool shit like that. It'd be pretty cool.
So like proper Karate Kid montage style.
Yeah, 100%. It's got those vibes, like just high up, you're training like on the 30th chamber and you had to go up to the top and you're just seeing all these mountains around you. Like, it's pretty cool. I love that about Toowoomba.
I love it, man. That is not what I was expecting. The reason the reason that I was bringing that up, Arjun, is because I was thinking more so from like a Queensland flooding perspective. I'm assuming that you're not really going to have like the same kind of flood styles, but now that I know that we can do Karate Kid montages there, I think like screw the floods, put all that stuff out the window. Like we've got a location.
Yeah, definitely. It doesn't have as much of the flood impact as we do hear about in other parts of Queensland, but like any area, there's low-lying areas, there's impacted creeks, things like that have it. I think more so what happens is just those hailstorms, the roofs and things like that come up a little bit more in Toowoomba. But overall, you're insured, or you get insurance, you protect yourself, you do your due diligence. Like any location, there's some impacts there.
Okay. All right. And what about infrastructure spend? What's actually happening in the town as far as like or infrastructure to make you go, yeah, this is still the place to be?
Yeah, that's one thing that it has no shortage of, and that too from a diversity perspective. So we've got a DA in the place or at that stage for a big hospital redevelopment of 1.8 billion, which would make it one of the largest in the country outside of a few major city ones. Other things, hydro storage, 980 million in tender stage. In construction stages, we've got some correctional facilities, cannabis facilities at DA stages, intermodal freight terminal, fried terminal, I was about to say. And then we've also got other sports precincts, entertainment precincts, dams, universities. Like It's unreal. When we in our client reports provide infrastructure, I actually have to scroll like multiple sections just to share what's happening in Toowoomba. And the most important piece here is that sure, you can do that in any major city too, but per capita, we need to think of that per capita. So it's relative to how many people are there. And the numbers are quite juicy in terms of overall infrastructure per capita.
Interesting. Okay, mate. And how many people are actually in Toowoomba? What kind of size are we talking?
Look, it's a pretty big city, just over 170,000 people, and a lot of jobs, low unemployment. I think just under 5% or just over 5% unemployment. And migration is starting to tick back in the right direction as well.
And is it turning into a bit of a Ballarat in the sense of like people like will live there, but then actually commute to the Big Smoke for work each day, or not quite?
Look, it's definitely there. I think there's obviously still affordable options that lie in the western suburbs of Brisbane, whereas, in parts of Melbourne on the way to Ballarat, it doesn't get all that cheap. It's still affordable to some, but people in Ballarat have their own local job markets, their local city. But yes, like Ballarat, though, there is some commute happening. Not as much as, say, the regional Victorian towns. I find the regional Victorian towns have a great, like there's even train lines and other things that are improving, other train infrastructure projects. That isn't quite there in Toowoomba. It's still much the car drive around. But Toowoomba, as you can see from that infrastructure pipeline, is seeing a lot of activity and localization of jobs. And as all of this starts to come to fruition, it further strengthens that.
Okay, so we've got a median house price of around $500,000, vacancy rates of about 0.3%. We've got some huge infrastructure spending going on here. I don't actually think did we get the yield out of it? What's the average yield there?
Yeah, yield's interesting. So yield has come down a little bit to 4.37, but there's an interesting curve change happening in the yield. So for all my fellow data nerds out there, when yield starts to drop, which really it started dropping from October 2021 up to about May 2022, it usually means that's the strongest period of capital growth occurring because the house price growth, even amongst low rental vacancy, is outperforming rental growth. And as this yield compression occurs, the attractiveness of a market starts to fade. And that's because you start to see the yields drop off and it's not as attractive for incoming investors. And the gap is actually larger for a renter because they now have to fork out more to buy since the rent is not going to be as much with a lower yield. And so these markets tend to slow quickly, but something's changed. Essentially from May 2022, when that first interest rate rise hit, everyone was thinking, okay, well, prices are going to fall off and decline. They did fall off their growth rates, which eased the yield pressure. But on top of that, we saw rents continue to grow in Toowoomba. So now the yield direction in Toowoomba has moved from flowing down to actually picking back up. So to give you some context, yields were at 4.33 in May, and now they're at 4.37. So that trend back up is showing that prices have slowed and rents are catching up even more. Prices are still growing, but not at the pace they were. And as the rents grow more and more and more, which we envision another double-digit year of growth in rents in Toowoomba over the next 12 months, that does mean that all of a sudden, renters are going to be more motivated and investors are more motivated, and the location just looks better from a prospectus of capital growth. And that's also partially why it's still been keeping on.
Man, I love it. Arjun, is there any final words of wisdom that you've got on Toowoomba before we part ways today? I'm just mindful of the time there.
Yeah, look, it's like any other location, the next 12 months aren't, in my opinion, going to be like they were for the last 2 years. So we've got to consider my, excitement, my thoughts, and all this thing I say about Toowoomba in a different light to what we once did over the last 2 years. The trends are healthy. It's still heavily undersupplied in comparison to pre-COVID supply. It's still rising even after a big rise, but it just cannot do the same thing. It just presents merit, hence why we're talking about this once more, to still continue to play a part in many investors' portfolio. But from a growth cycle, it's definitely not at its earliest stage.
Okay. Love it. Arjun Paliwal from InvestorKit. Thanks again for jumping on the show, man. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, mate.
Let's just recap a few of these data points or critical data points here. Two of the biggest infrastructure spends that Arjun just said, what were they? $1.8 billion for a hospital, and then an almost $1 billion hydrogen storage center, I think he said. That's just two of them, alongside all the other hundreds of millions of dollars worth of investment going to this town. A median house price that's still growing, but currently sitting around the $500,000 mark with a 0.3% vacancy rate. Talk about pushing your risk out there and also making it super affordable to get into. And let's not forget an area that offers lots of Karate Kid montage moments as well. But if you're not invested in Queensland and you're looking to diversify, like I'm just looking at this data right now, like this is looking good for longevity. As we always say, this is not financial advice. Please speak independent professional financial advice before you go and just randomly buy in any town. But take this kind of stuff to them, because this is absolutely the kind of information that you want as you're starting to sculpt the right decision for yourself. But that is enough from me today. It is almost Christmas time, so I hope you guys have got an absolutely magical end of the year plan and some amazing time with family. But my name is Todd Sloan. This is the Pizza and Property Podcast. We eat lots of pizza as well. But have an amazing rest of the week and stay awesome.